evening, everyone, and thank you for being here for the 2024 Teaching Fellows Institute Parent and Community Talk with Dr. Bryan Harris on helping your child build resilience and stress management. Bryan has been a favorite of our teaching fellows since about the 2020 time period, and we're very fortunate to have him presenting to our class of 2024 and other alumni here in town in person for the first time. Previously, he's been remote. So I'm going to introduce Bryan and give you his brief bio. There's lots more to say about Bryan, but I just whittled it down to one paragraph, and then I'm going to hand it over to Bryan, and we'll take questions at the end. Bryan Harris has been an educator for over 30 years. He has served as a classroom teacher, an elementary school principal, a district level director, and an independent trainer and consultant, having trained over 18,000 educators in powerful and effective strategies that increase student engagement and achievement. Now serving as an associate professor of education at Arizona Christian University, he is known for his engaging trainings and presentations that demonstrate relevant and practical strategies. He is the author of 6 books, including the popular 2020 book entitled 17 Things Resilient Teachers Do and 4 Things They Hardly Ever Do. So with that, thank you, Bryan, for being with us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks. You're welcome. Thanks, Barbara. I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you this evening. It's a pretty important topic, a pretty fun one as well. How do we help students manage or help our kids manage the stressors of life is really our question. But before we jump in, I'm going to make a quick prediction. We're going to focus our discussion on kids and on our children and on how we help them. But the prediction is I think you're going to make some personal connections to your own life as well. In fact, I could change the entire first slide and keep everything else pretty much the same. I could say how to help yourself build resilience and manage stress, or how to help other grown-ups. The concepts are the same. Now, the examples I use will be focused on kids. The specific strategies I'll share will be focused on kids. But really, these ideas are important for all of us, regardless of how old you are, and regardless of how already well you're doing managing your stress and build resilience. I hope I'll give you some additional tools in your toolbox. Good topic, a fun topic, and so I'm excited to jump in. Here's what I will ask you to do. If you're in a situation where you can turn your camera on, I'd love to see faces. It's nice to see facial expressions, and every once in a while, somebody waves at me and those kind of things. So if you have a position where you can turn your camera on, feel free to do that. If you're not, I get it. No hard feelings, but it's nice to kind of see people if we're able to do that as well. We'll keep everybody muted until we kind of do the Q&A, but we do have a chat feature in there. As questions come up, feel free to drop those in there. If I can't get to the questions during our discussion, we'll attach it at the very end when we do the Q&A. I see a lot of you putting your cameras on. Thank you so much. That makes me feel good. So to start, I have a quiz. I have 4 questions for you. Actually, it's time. It's quiz time. Just what you wanted to do at 7:06 in the evening is take a quiz. But this is a pretty easy quiz. Now, if you want to use the chat and put your answers in the chat, feel free to do that. If you want to just answer them in your own head, you can do it that way too. Or if you're sitting with someone, you can certainly have a brief discussion. True or false of these 4 statements? Which ones are true? Which ones might be false? Let's pull on our prior knowledge, see what we already know about stress and stress management. I'll give you about 30 seconds to answer those questions. What do you think? Are these true or false? Here's an interesting side note question as you continue to tackle those. Did you know that chronic stress accelerates aging? Literally the physical aging of our body. If you didn't believe me on that one, have you ever seen a picture of the President of the United States? Any president, any year, any decade. The day they're inaugurated and then 4 years later, have you seen the physical changes that take place when you're under that much stress? Yeah, stress is a kind of a big issue. So let's see how you did. Thanks, Zach. Thanks, faculty, whoever you are. Maybe there's a whole bunch of you sitting in a room together. Number 1, have you noticed that? Well, it's true. Here's the answer. Number 1's true. That when you're around people that just are high stress people, you tend to pull in some of those characteristics into your own life. Number 1 is absolutely true. When you're around stressed people, it increases your stress. In fact, here's something I'm going to share with you in just a little bit. Stress is contagious. Stress literally bleeds out onto the people around us. Now, that can be good, that can be not so good, depending on how we approach it. But number 1, being around stressed people absolutely increases our own stress level. Number 2, have you ever noticed that when you're under high levels of stress or unmanageable stress, whether you call it high or low, doesn't matter, that Self-control goes out the window. You supersize everything, don't you? Right? It's I'm just going to get McDonald's for dinner tonight, and just the calories come like in mass. Number two is absolutely true. You probably figured it out already. Numbers one, two, three, and four are all true. Now, I share these with you not to freak you out about stress and not to stress you out about stress, but just to make the point that unchecked, unmediated stress, undealt with stress, has a massive impact on our emotional health, our physical health, our relational health. You name it, stress will impact it. The good news is I'm going to give you a better definition of stress if you don't already have a pretty good one, and give you lots of ways to go about managing the stress that you might be experiencing in your life. For those of you who like to see some sort of an agenda, here's what we'll do. We'll give some good definitions to this thing called stress and resilience. Spoiler alert, stress is all about my perception that something's beyond my control. Resilience is my ability to manage the difficult times in life. I'll give a better, more concrete definition of both of those here in just a minute. So we'll define it, then I'll share with you strategies that you can use in your own life as well as in the life of your kids. Now, we want to use these stress management in our own lives to model it for our kids. It's not just about telling kids to do a better job managing stuff. It's about us doing a better job managing stuff and modeling it for them, and then co-managing stress with them. That's an important idea. And then I'll ask you at the end kind of what your questions are, what your next steps are, where we go from there, what you might take away from this. Now, if you see anything on the screen that you like, feel free to hit the print screen button on your device or on your laptop, or get your camera out and feel free to take a picture of it. All that works just fine. If you wanted a copy, a PDF copy of these handouts, just send me an email and I'll be glad to share them with you. Any way I can support you, supporting other people with this topic, I'm there for you. This topic is a massive one, and one I'm pretty passionate about, is how do we help people, whether they're little people or big people, manage stress? Because when we manage stress well, our life is good. When we don't manage stress well, our life gets very, very difficult. So as I mentioned, we need to do probably a better definition of stress. Here you go. I'll let you take a look. Hopefully you got a good giggle out of my picture there on the left. Hopefully those aren't our only two options in life, but sometimes it feels like it, right? So let's talk definition. If you're a note taker, or if you like to highlight or underline things, here's how we might approach it. First, underline the idea physiological or physiological response, or circle that or rewrite that. Stress is physiology. To the brain, there's no separate thing called the body. To the body, there's no separate thing called the brain. It's one system designed to work in tandem. So when something is physiological, it doesn't just impact our emotions and our mental health, it impacts our physical health as well. In fact, unchecked, long-term, unmediated stress wreaks havoc on your body. We see all sorts of physical conditions that are a result of stress or undealt with stress, which causes inflammation and all sorts of other problems in the body. So first, it's physiological. It's physiological, so it happens to the whole system, impacts the whole system. The other thing to know about physiology is that it's automatic. People don't wake up in the morning thinking, I'm going to choose to be stressed today. People don't see something happen to them and say, I'm going to choose a stress response. No, something happens to us, and I'll dig into that here in a moment, and then our brain and our body responds with what we call the stress response. It's automatic. We don't control it. That's an important thing to keep in mind when you're working with children. Again, whether they're little kids like a 2-year-old or bigger kids like a teenager, is they're not choosing a negative stress response. They might partially choose an attitude, but when something happens to us where we perceive we have no control, or we perceive that the demands on us are greater than what I have the ability to give, then the brain and body responds in a very specific way. I'll tell you what that is here in just a moment. So physiology is the first thing. The second thing is perception. Stress is only perception. There's no such thing in your life that is stressful. There's only your perception of whether or not you have control. That's brilliant. Let me say it again, because that's a really key thing. There's nothing in your life that's stressful. There's only your perception whether or not you have any control over something. And when you have the perception or the belief, by the way, your perception might be absolutely right, absolutely correct. It's not always correct, but it often is. When I have the perception that something's beyond my control, something's demanding more of me than I have to give, stress kicks in. It's all about control. In fact, if you're a super short note taker, you don't like taking lots of notes, but short notes are okay, just write down this sentence. Stress is about control. period. When I'm going into a situation where I feel like I don't have control over it, my brain and my body kick in primarily with two chemicals, cortisol and adrenaline. You've heard of cortisol as the stress hormone. So cortisol gets a lousy rap like it's a bad thing. Cortisol is actually great. In short squirts, in short doses, short exposure, cortisol is awesome. Cortisol combined with adrenaline, adrenaline gives you the physical energy. When those two are combined, they give you physical energy, they help with attentional focus, they help with problem solving, and they help with long-term memory. All four of those are great in the short term. So in the short term, when I'm exposed to something that I perceive as beyond my control, my brain and body literally says this. Well, not literally, I'm playing fast and loose with the words here, but my body says, okay, if you don't feel like you have control, we'll give you the resources you need in order to get control. And that's what cortisol and adrenaline do. They give you the physical energy in case you need to run or fight or scream or hit or jump, right? I get physical energy because that'll help me get back control. It gives me attentional focus because I need to focus on the problem. It helps me solve the problem solving skills, and it helps me remember how I solved the problem in the first place. I'm going into a situation, I feel like, uh-oh, there's a disequilibrium here. My system says, let's get back to equilibrium by giving you the chemicals you need in order to get you back under control. Think about it this way. If something is within your control, it doesn't stress you out, does it? Let's use your finances as an example. If right now your finances are under control, not that you wish you didn't have more money, but if right now your checkbook is balanced, you have enough to pay the bills, if you want to go out to have a nice dinner, you could, you're able to save for vacation and save for Christmas or holidays or whatever. Right now, if you're able to meet all of your obligations, money doesn't stress you out. Not that you wish you didn't. Maybe it stresses you out about long-term retirement, but if you're able to make all your obligations, you're like, all right, wish I had more, but I got it. But if you've ever been in a situation where there was too much month at the end of the money, you've heard of that phrase, right? That's a Dave Ramsey saying, not mine. Where there's too much month where you just don't have enough money to meet all your bills or your obligations, then it stresses you out. Stress is only about control. When I feel like I'm out of control, my system wants to get me back in control, and it gives me the resources I need, cortisol and adrenaline. It's about this perception that something's beyond my ability to cope with it. That's actually the definition of stress. If we go a little bit deeper on this, we realize that short-term stress is actually good. It's long-term, unchecked, unmediated stress that's really killing us. You actually want short-term stress in your life. You just want short squirts of short-term stress. You want stress where you're in a situation where you're able to deal with it and handle it and then recover. I'm going to show you a diagram that outlines that pretty clearly. Short-term stress, wonderful for you. Long-term stress, that's really what gets us. And that's what we call chronic stress or distress that's toxic to the body, that then long-term stress is what impacts my emotional health, my relational health, and my physical health. Now, there's a picture of some people in roller coasters for a reason. So here's our quick analogy. Imagine you're at an amusement park, and you're waiting in the back of the line to get on a roller coaster. And you're at the back of the line. It's going to take you 20 minutes to get from the back of the line to the front of the line, actually on the roller coaster. When you're at the back of the line, you're pretty relaxed. Your heart rate's pretty low. You might be sipping on a drink. You might be checking your phone. You're pretty relaxed. You might be having a conversation. But as slowly as you move towards the platform to get on the roller coaster, you'll notice things start to change. You start to say, okay, I'm going to throw all my garbage away. I'm going to put my phone to make sure it doesn't fall out of my pocket in case I turn it upside down. You start cueing into the sights and sounds around you. Is anybody screaming? Are there any alarms? Do I smell any smoke? Right? You're totally tuned in. Because are you afraid for your life when you get on that roller coaster? No, not really. Do you think you're going to die? I don't think so. But it's beyond your control, really, what's going to happen, especially if you've not been on that roller coaster before. So by the time you slowly get up and you get onto the platform, you get in the car, they put that little bar down over your knees and you're hanging on, you're full on stress mode, right? You're not going to be taking a nap at that moment. You're full on, fully engaged. You have energy, you have focus, you're into it. And then like 2 minutes later, you're off the roller coaster. Have you ever noticed they're really, really short, maybe too short? You're like, that should have been longer. See, the short-term rides on a roller coaster are actually healthy for us. It's healthy for your body to respond to something stressful, deal with it, in a healthy way, and then recover. Can you imagine how kind of out of mind you would be or crazy you would be if you were on a roller coaster for 5 or 6 hours? Some families and some kids never get off the roller coaster. They're just always stressed. And then we wonder why their behavior is the way it is, or why their attitude is the way there is, or why their physical health is the way it is, because they never get off the roller coaster. They never get a chance to recover. So let me show you some nerdy brain diagrams here for just a moment to hit this idea home. Then we'll start getting into the definition of resilience and then some strategies. Homeostasis, that's the word that your high school science teacher, biology teacher probably taught you. And it's this idea that every living organism, every living system desires a healthy state. Think homeostasis starts with an H and so does healthy. Homeostasis is healthy. So I'm going along in life and something happens to me. That's the middle line right there, the middle vertical line. Something happens where I perceive that I don't have control. I have a perception, uh-oh, more demands on me than I have to give. So my brain releases chemicals, cortisol and adrenaline, usually go together, but not always. I release cortisol and adrenaline, and I deal with the stressor. Here's a real life example. You're driving to the doctor's appointment and there's a traffic jam and a car accident and you're going to be 20 minutes late for your doctor's appointment, right? You're like, "Oh no, I can't be late. They're going to charge me, or what if they give away my spot?" Think about in that moment of, uh-oh, I'm going to be late to the doctor. You immediately go into problem solving mode because that's what cortisol and adrenaline are designed to do, is solve the problem. So you quickly go into problem solving mode and you say, okay, I'm going to call here and I'm going to reroute over here. Maybe if I take this shortcut back this way, you just solve the problem. And then as soon as the problem is solved and you get to the doctor's office, you're like, okay, I can breathe now. Or here's an example for educators or anybody actually who uses a computer. You sit down, you power up your computer to start an important project. Maybe you have a class to teach, and then it's that time that your computer decides to reboot and update. You're like, oh no, it's going to take 2 hours to update my computer and I've got a class to teach. That's beyond your control. What you do in that case is cortisol and adrenaline is then released in your system and you just solve the problem. You say, okay, I'll borrow this laptop over here. I'll do these handouts over here. I'll just adjust this over here and we'll just figure it out. And as soon as it's figured out and the computer's back up and working again, you're like, oh, okay, that's the recovery mode. This is the way your system was designed to work. Deal with the stressor, handle it successfully, and then recover. But this is where it gets good. Many kids and their families, maybe even many of us, experience very little recovery time. We just have stressor after stressor after stressor. That's what you see there on the left. Just hit after hit after hit with very little recovery time. See, our brain is desired to take some time just to recover. I deal with it, I recover. Then I'm ready to deal with another one, then I recover. But sometimes in our society now, because there's so many things coming our way constantly, is I have hit after hit after hit with very little or no recovery time before the next stressor. Or I've experienced some sort of traumatic event in my life. A trauma is something that overwhelms the whole system. Or both. I have a lot of things happening or one big major thing happening. Sometimes I have them together. This is what we call allostasis. Allostasis is an adjusted baseline or an adjusted stress response. We might use the analogy of a thermostat on the wall. Is when your brain goes into, or your whole system goes into allostasis, it's just an adjusted stress response. And it's usually not healthy. For some people, it's too high. For some people, it's too low. In fact, it would look like this. Allostasis, so a term that was coined a number of years ago to describe the system's response to repeated, unchecked, unmediated stress. Homeostasis is healthy. Allostasis is adjusted or an unhealthy stress response. See, some people, the chart you see here is the same one I showed you here, just a little bit smaller, and then I changed the red line. So one response that we sometimes see from people is what we call hypervigilance. Is I'm going along in life and something happens and I stay elevated. I don't have that recovery time. You know people in your life, they're just always on edge, always ready to fight, maybe a word or a fist, they're just always tense because they've not had recovery time from maybe a traumatic event in their life. We call that hypervigilance. They're always on edge. See, a good stress response is you're on edge for a little bit, and then you recover. If you've been there before in your life or know people who have, it's tough to be always on guard, like everything's out to kill you. That's not a fun place to live, or not fun, a mental set to live in. That's one way your brain responds or your system responds. Another way is what we call hypo-responsiveness. These are the people in your life that nothing seems to get through. They don't seem to care about anything. You have some people, maybe some kids you're working with, maybe your own children, where it's like they don't care about anything. Grades don't motivate them, money doesn't motivate them, status doesn't motivate, they don't care about anything. Okay, video games, that's it. That's also an unhealthy response. See, the one on the left, they care and want to fight every battle. The kid on the right doesn't want to fight any battle at all. Neither of them are healthy. They're just the way the brain is attempting to respond to these overwhelming number of stressors that are coming at their life. So the kid on the left, the hyper-responsive kid who always wants to fight everything, we look at this kid like they're a behavior problem or a discipline problem. Some kids are behavior problems. I get that. I'm not suggesting that every kid in the world is perfect. But I might step back and say, are those behaviors a result of unchecked stressors that they just don't know how to deal with? So as a result, they try to deal with it by fighting every fight. The kid on the right looks like a motivation problem. We have to motivate them to do more. And then I might suggest, are some kids difficult to motivate? Yes. I'm not suggesting every kid is perfect, but I step back and I say, maybe it's less motivation and maybe it's more stress management. That if they had a balanced way to manage their stress or knew how to manage their stress, they might get to a healthier state. It's really about stress management for many, many of us. So I mentioned this earlier during the opening quiz that stress is contagious, and this actually proves it. There's an actual study that was done that found this, and we can check cortisol levels with saliva samples, cheek swabs. We can check cortisol levels, and this is what they found. This particular study was done with second graders and their teachers. I'm an educator. I think Barbara shared that earlier. What they found is when second grade teachers had elevated cortisol levels, so did their kids, and it just cycles out of control, doesn't it? My stress feeds out onto the people around me. That's true of parents as well. When we're constantly stressed and on edge about things, it bleeds over because it's designed to. Kids are designed to mimic our responses to problems. And when we don't handle them very well, no wonder our kids respond the way they do. I'm not blaming everything on poor parenting, by the way, because many of us did everything right with parents and our kids still made poor choices. I get that. We'll get to that slightly here towards the end as well. But the way I manage my stress as an adult has a direct impact on how my kids are able to manage their stress. That's our takeaway with that one. So the question then is, what do we do about this? Here is perhaps the most important message of the day. And I am going to give you many different strategies. But first, let me solidify this idea by putting it into our body. If you would, for a moment, put both your hands in front of you like this, palms up at about shoulder length, shoulder height. In your left hand, we're going to represent the concept of stress. And in the right hand, the concept of control. Raise your left and lower your right. When stress levels are high, it's because by definition, control levels are low. That's the definition of stress, is a perception that I don't have control over something. Now reverse them. If I want to lower my own stress level or help someone else lower their stress level, they have to get control. That's perhaps the most important message. If I'm trying to help someone else manage their stress, they've got to get control. Now we'll talk about appropriate control, but they never go up like this. They never go down like this. They're inverse. There's our math word for the day. They go in opposite directions. So you know your kid, you know what they can handle. What we do is we sit back and say, is this behavior as a result of a stressor? And if it is, what aspect, excuse me, what aspect of their life can I give them control over right now? I might not be able to give them control over the thing that is stressing them out. For example, if they're stressed out because they're worried about the test tomorrow morning, I can't really control the test, but I can give them control over some aspect of their life, what they do with their body, choices they make when it comes to studying or getting ready for the test. I have to have control over something or my stress level doesn't go down. Now, best case scenario, I get control over the thing that's stressing me out, but we can't always do that. What I can do is get control over something, and that's often what I do with my body, because my body's designed to mediate the stress. Cortisol and adrenaline give physical energy to the body. And one of the worst things we do to kids sometimes is when we see they're tense and stressed, we force them into a small box physically. We say, sit still, stay in your room, go to your room, be quiet, don't do anything. But cortisol and adrenaline, they're designed to say, run, jump, scream, yell, rip, throw, go. And when I've got all this tension in my body and I don't have an outlet for it, now I'm not suggesting you let your kids all of a sudden start punching walls. That's silly. But they've got to do something to mediate out that stress. And until they do, it just gets more and more tense till many of them get to a breaking point. So give them control. You know your kid. I'll give you some ways to help give them control, but you know your kids and what they can handle. For those of you who've met me before, I'm a bit of a brain nerd. I love looking at brain stuff. You can probably already hint that at what I've shared with you so far. But let's actually look at brains. So we're looking at SPECT technology, SPECT. It's just a nuclear medicine technique where we can measure activity in your brain while you're conscious. So what you're looking at here are brain images or scans of the same brain, 4 different views of the same brain. Top left, we're looking up like we're looking up under your chin. The top right and lower left, those are side views, and then the top down view from the bottom right. So this right here is a brain under low levels or manageable levels of stress, and we see nice areas of even activation. You see some geography in the brain there as well, but we see a brain that's managing pretty well because there's not too many demands. When there's too many demands on us, that's another definition of stress. Perception of control or just too many demands on the system. It's like it flips the breaker when there's too much juice being called out from the outlet, right? Now, here is a brain that's stressed. Most people, when I show that to them, they say, oh, well, that's not looking very good. Let's look at the image in the upper right. This is the images of we're looking up under the chin. So the 2 big holes at the top, those are right above your eyeballs, the prefrontal cortex part of the brain. First, note this: these are not physical holes. These are not like an ice cream scooper scoops some material out of your brain. They're areas of underactivity, in this case, just on a color scale. So you can see which part of the brain are less active, which parts are less active than other parts of the brain. And this one is so interesting in the upper left. This part of our brain we associate with thinking and planning and self-control, the little voice inside your head you talk to, right there. When I'm under high levels of stress, that part of my brain is not inactive, it's just underactive. Can I still do some thinking and planning and processing and looking at cause and effect and right and wrong? When I'm stressed, the answer is yes. It's just much, much more difficult than when this is my brain. It's easier to handle those cause and effect discussions. If I make this choice, what's the outcome? When my brain is in this state rather than this state. The good news is there's ways we can get out of that state, and our brain's not designed to be in that state for very long. My brain essentially downshifts and gives most of my energy and my focus to survival when I'm stressed. Let's hit home on one additional idea, then talk strategies for the rest of our time, including the Q&A. So sometimes the issue or the question is it stress or is it anxiety? It's so common for our kids today to say, I have anxiety. I struggle with anxiety. What really is anxiety and how does it differ from stress? This is a really important discussion. Stress is a response to something specific. It usually has an external cause, like I'm overwhelmed because I have the test tomorrow, and if I don't pass the test, I can't go on the field trip, and I can't go on the field trip. I can't hang out with my friends. I can't hang out with my friends. My life's over. That's a very specific thing. So one way you can think about it is when you're talking to kids about what's worrying them or overwhelming them, don't worry about the exact definitions of stress versus anxiety. Just ask the question is, what's overwhelming you or what's worrying you right now? If they can point to a specific thing, it's probably stress. And the good news there is when I can identify the specific stressor, then we can walk through it a little bit easier. Anxiety is this general sense of dread, this general sense that things just aren't right. And it typically has an internal cause. So if they say, I'll just never be able to amount to anything, I'm just no good at anything, I can never do anything, I'll just never be able to make it. That's this general idea that I'm just overwhelmed by a vague cause. In fact, if you've ever had somebody in your life, maybe some of you who have gone to the doctor and been formally diagnosed with anxiety, it's titled generalized anxiety disorder. because it's this general idea of something's wrong rather than the specific stressor that I can point to. An easy way to remember it is S specific and S stress, right? They both start with the letter S. S is something specific is what's stressing me out versus something that's general. Part of our problem is they often have the same effects on our body. When I'm anxious, my heart rate increases and I lose sleep and I physically break out, or something physically happens. When I'm anxious, that happens, but that happens when I'm stressed also, or when I have unchecked long-term unmediated stress. So they can often look the same. They have different causes and we deal with them slightly differently, but they often look the same. The best question you can ask for your kids is, tell me what's going on. Can we identify something specific? It's probably a stressor. If it's not specific, it's just general, like I don't think I'll ever be good at anything, or everybody hates me, or nobody loves me. Every kid says that to a certain extent at some point in their life. That's probably anxiety. And we handle them slightly differently, but there are some overlaps as well. I came across this checklist that I thought was pretty interesting. If you want your own copy of it, feel free to just print a screen or grab it from the screen or send me an email. I'll send you a PDF of this as well. This is just walking through some of the differences. Again, there's some overlaps, but we just try to figure out what exactly is it, because especially if we're going to get help from a mental health professional, they're going to ask these same questions. And really, a mental health professional is going to pull in when we think there's anxiety more than a specific stressor. The good news is when we can help our kids identify a specific stressor, then we can tackle it. We're teaching them some life skills. Often when it comes to anxiety, this just general sense that I can't solve things, then we often need some external help. Mental health professional can help us along the way with that as well. Side note about this. I mentioned earlier, our society today kind of just says everybody has anxiety. Um, and it's common for pretty much every child to have some anxious moments in their life. It's just part of growing up. What we're looking for are longer term patterns. If once in a while your kid comes to you and says, I'm just overwhelmed with life, and they break down in tears, well, welcome to the club. You have a 13-year-old. That's just life. But I'm looking at kind of long-term stuff where then I have to answer myself, is this stuff keep coming back? Then I might seek a little bit of help. Couple last notes about anxiety, then I promise we'll touch into the strategies, the good stuff. I would beg you of this. First, yes, anxiety is a real thing. Generalized anxiety disorder, it's in the manual, it's a real thing, it's there. Medical professionals or psychiatrists, psychologists would diagnose that. It's a real thing. But we would do our students, actually our society, a benefit if we stop telling people they have anxiety. The reason I'm passionate about this one. Here's the reason. Our labels become our identity. In our society right now, especially, our labels, how I'm labeled becomes who I am. I'm the anxious kid. I'm the ADD kid. I'm the learning disabled kid, right? In the past, I think our society is changing a little bit, but there's still some of this. In the past, it typically was our talents and our successes became our identity. I don't know that that was always a good thing, but my talents became my identity. I'm the track star. I'm the quote unquote smart kid. Those weren't always a good thing, but now our identity is often shifted. We become identified by our weaknesses. And if we tell kids, yeah, you have anxiety, is that the same as like gender and skin color and hair color and family name, which are immutable, right? It's like I'm 5'8" on a tall day. That's pretty immutable. Is being anxious the same as my height? Because we don't want them to overlap these ideas and think that, well, now that's what you are and you'll never be anything but the anxious kid. So we have to just be careful in our language. Language matters quite a bit as well. So, okay, last idea on this anxiety thing, then we'll talk resilience and strategies. So I'll pause so you can take a quick preview of the slide. Couple of things we try to teach kids about emotions. Great topic. One is that all emotions are temporary. Whatever you're feeling right now isn't going to stay here forever. This is both good news and bad news. Have you ever been so excited the night before your birthday you couldn't sleep? That was a really pretty hyper emotional, happy experience because you're going to have a great birthday party. Didn't last forever, did it? So the great emotions don't always last forever. neither do the negative ones. Now, I have to be careful because if a child's in the middle of a deep negative emotional experience, I have to be careful and just say, oh, get over it. It won't last forever. I don't want to do that. But I want them to help them understand that emotions, by definition, by design, are temporary. They change pretty quickly, right? And emotions, especially the strong negative emotions like fear or worry, whether you call worry, anxiety, stress, don't worry about the exact definitions. Just when you talk to kids, just separate them when you ask those questions. They're just designed to get your attention. If you're anxious about something, let's talk about it, because anxiety in your system is saying we got something's out of whack here. Let's get it back into whack. All emotions, negative ones, are designed to spotlight a problem. Just like pain, when you have a paper cut on your finger, the pain is your system highlighting, hey, we got a problem, attend to the problem. That's what negative emotions, same thing. They're just designed to say, hey, something's out of whack. Let's figure out how to get it back into whack. I can manage myself to a better emotions. As parents, that's our job to help them manage and co-manage into a better emotion. And it can take time, of course, to recover. So let's talk resilience and then strategy. So we probably need to give resilience a pretty good definition. Here's a good start. Resilience is simply my ability to deal with difficult challenges. It's my reserve of getting after it. It's my reserve of, okay, I've got enough. Let's use a bank account analogy. I've got enough money in the bank to pay the bills. That's my resilience. It's my ability to persist through difficult times, manage the heartaches of life, go through the roller coaster of life. The ability to say, okay, something's knocked me down. I can get back up and go again. It's my ability to cope, to overcome some difficult obstacle in life. And resilience for most of us builds as we get older. We certainly don't have the same well of resilience at 13 as we do at 33. So that it builds in life. My favorite definition or way to think about resilience is it's like life's shock absorbers. The shocks in your car, the shocks and the struts in your car are designed to change your experience with the road. If you've ever ridden in a bad car with bad shocks, you are bouncing all over the place and you're like, oh, I'm feeling every bump in the road. If you've ridden in a cushy car with good shocks, it changes your experience. Doesn't change the road. That's a key idea. The shocks in your car, they don't change the road. The potholes are still there. They change how you experience the effect of that pothole on your life. So it's like life's shock absorbers. Another analogy that I like to use is it's a bit like a ship navigating difficult waters. A good captain knows how to navigate difficult channels and difficult patterns in life or in the sea. That's what resilience is for us. And it really just consists of two things: how I think and what I do. I think this is a tad simplistic, but it's a good place to start. Resilience is how I think about something. It's the mindset, my ability to overcome some of the negative thoughts, for example. It's my beliefs, it's my value, it's how I talk to myself. And it's also my ability to do something specific and external. I'm going to show you a little bit of both here in the next couple of minutes. So it consists of how I think and what I do. All right, I've been talking a million miles an hour for the last 41 minutes or so. I'm going to pause for a moment and just allow you to just connect and reflect where we've been. Quick review time. Feel free to put this in the chat if you like to process that way. If not, just do a little bit of self-reflection and thinking. Or if you're with someone, have a brief conversation. What is stress? What is resilience? And what's one or two things you should remember from our first few minutes together? So yeah, thank you for those wonderful ideas and feedback in the chat. That's great. So here's our question: is how do we actually do it? How do we help our students build resilience and manage stress? So building resilience and manage stress, I'm just going to say for now they're synonyms. They're not exactly, but I manage the stress by practicing or building resilience. How do I do that? I'm going to get there. There are 5 methods there on the screen. In all reality, in the next 10 or 15 minutes, we don't have time for all of them. I'll pick and choose just a couple. If you wanted to know more about the other ones, just reach out to me. I'll give you my email address and we can find a time to talk just a little bit more. We'll certainly talk about the first two, gratitude and reframing, and then we can talk about the others at a different time if you are so interested. Like a lot of you, I probably plan 3 hours worth of stuff to try to cram into 1 hour. That's life, right? But so let's dig into just these first two. How do we go about managing stress and building resilience? The first thing we do is practice lots of gratitude with our kids. In fact, I'll give you an opportunity to do that right now. Take a look at question number one and answer the question. If you want to put it in the chat, great. If you don't want to, no pressure. What's something you would say right here, right now at 7:46 on a Tuesday evening that you would say I'm grateful for? Could be something big like I'm grateful for my family, I'm grateful for my health, I'm grateful for my community and my faith. You can go big, you can go small, and you can say, I am grateful that my husband put gas in my car this morning. You can be as big or as little as you want. What's something you would say, I'm grateful for? The more we practice gratitude in our own, we gotta not be hypocrites. So we practice it in our own life, and kids can see us just being grateful and expressing gratitude. Sometimes that expression of gratitude is, I tell kids why I'm giving an extra nice tip to this server because they did something. I'm grateful for their extra service, so I'm explaining what we're doing. Sometimes I just sit down and I'm grateful to my kids. I express why I'm grateful for things like my health, that I've lived 54 years in life and I've had very few health problems. I just practice this process of just being grateful so that kids see it's part of who I am. And then we start to expand the questions back to them. What are you grateful for? Now, I know a lot of teachers who do these kind of things in their classrooms. Here's why you want to do this gratitude thing. Pretty consistently, just have the discussion. What's going well? What are you grateful for? What seems to be going well in life? Because when we focus on hope, optimism, gratitude, positivity, whatever word you want to use, we'll just throw them all together. It actually empowers me during times of stress. All gratitude does is say, right now, I've got some stressors, no doubt, but I've also got I've got some things going well in life. Maybe not in equal measure right now. Maybe I've got a few more stressors than I have things that are going well, but I've got some. All gratitude does is temporarily put me in the position of, oh yeah, I need to remember that's something good about my life right now. It probably releases dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical in your brain that makes you feel good. It gives you a sense of control that you identify what in life is going well. Now, depending on the kid I'm working with, and they're in the middle of being overwhelmed with something, I don't say, well, think about gratitude and you'll be better. When I'm overwhelmed and tense and about to freak out and break down, that's not the moment I do gratitude. Gratitude is a lot of this daily habit stuff where I'm pre-building the skills. In the middle of a breakdown, I'm not trying to be grateful. I'm trying to recover and I can get to there eventually. If you don't believe me, take a look at what Sean Aker says. He's a Harvard researcher, and he merely says this. When you help someone go from a negative to a neutral state, emotional state, condition, to a negative to a neutral to a neutral to a positive state or emotion, condition, the efficiency at which our brain functions increases at every step. So if I want my kids to deal with something challenging, then I want to put them in a state of gratitude, because when I'm in a state of gratitude, I'm much more likely to tackle something that might be challenging or difficult, or to have a certain kind of a discussion. And since I mentioned earlier, I'm a bit of a brain nerd, we can also look back to brains. Also looking at SPECT scans here, take a look for a moment and compare left image to right image. Without doing a super deep dive into this image, this comes to us from Dr. Daniel Amen. He's the world's leading authority in the use of this kind of brain technology to understand brain function. And so we're looking at one person's brain. We're looking this image as if we're looking up under the chin. So right where it says grateful and hateful, that's the prefrontal cortex part of the brain. An individual went to Dr. Amen and said, I'm doing some research on gratitude and positivity, and I want my own brain scanned, because you can get your own brain scan and figure out what's going on in there. It's pretty cool. So they did two conditions. The first one, Dr. Amen says, when we're scanning your brain, because you do this while you're conscious, just focus on things that are going well in life. Whether you call it prayer, gratitude, positivity, whatever, contemplation, just focus on that which is going well in life. That's what you see in image one. Dr. Amen looked at that image and said, that's a pretty good, healthy, functioning brain. That's a brain we would like to see. But when we do science, we always compare and contrast. That's the essence of science. We compare and contrast. He said, this time we're going to study you again. This time, the state I want you to think about is all your fears, your anxieties, and your worries. In other words, I want you to focus on what's freaking you out. And then we start to see some less activity in parts of the brain that matter. Most interestingly, where you see the white arrow, that's the left temporal lobe. It's on the right-hand side of the screen because it's underneath, so it's flipped. Dr. Amen looked at that and said, that's interesting. Less activity in the left temporal lobe, that's the part of our brain we associate with spoken language. Have you ever noticed that when you're stressed and you go negative and dark in your thinking, the words don't always come out quite right? Or the words that do come out aren't your church words? You probably noticed that. It's actually a brain thing, isn't it? So we understand that mentality, mindset impacts behavior because it impacts what's happening in the brain as well. So I want to do a lot of gratitude kind of stuff with kids. And there's even more evidence, if you like evidence and that kind of stuff, that focusing on gratitude produces positive mental health results. But we also know this, if we ask our kids the same question every day, what are you grateful for today? They'll start rolling their eyes and say, Mom, come on. We answered this one yesterday. So we ask them in different ways. Here are some examples of ways you might ask that very same question. Now, most of these are adult type questions. You know your kids, you know what kind of questions you might ask. But what you could do is just go online, go to Google and search gratitude questions or gratitude prompts for 8-year-olds, if you have an 8-year-old, or gratitude prompts for high school kids. And you'll find tons and tons of really cool things out there. But they all get to the same idea. It's helping me identify what might be going well in life rather than a challenge. And here's one more way to think about it before we get into the next strategy, is help your kids understand that in life, there are both headwinds and tailwinds. Like when you're riding your bike. If you're out riding your bike and there's a headwind, you have to put your head down and you have to pedal a little bit harder. You're going to have headwinds in life. You're going to have things that make life harder. It's just being a human being. It's just going to happen. As much as I want to protect you from it, I can't. There's going to be things that in life just get difficult. It's normal. Everybody has it. But you also have tailwinds. If you're out riding your bike and there's a wind at your back, it makes the pedaling a little bit easier. It's a little less effort when you have lots of tailwind. You're going to have both in life. So what we do when things start to get overwhelming is we step back and say, I'm going to have headwinds, but let me identify the tailwinds. The tailwinds might be things like grandma's only a mile away and can call her whenever we want. Tailwinds are things like the teacher who's working with you to get you caught up in math, she really cares about you. Tailwinds are things like look at family and all that we're doing. Right? Tailwinds are helping me to identify. Again, I might not have headwinds and tailwinds in equal measure, but helping me identify my tailwinds is helping me also take control, which helps me to ultimately manage stress. Oh boy, time is flying fast. Let's do this. Let me share with you one of my all-time favorites. Then we'll end with a little bit of Q&A and we'll hang out if you have any questions. So let's talk practicing reframing. Remember that stress is all about control, and part of my control is what happens up here. So we teach kids to do this thing we call reframing, but we practice it in our own lives first. So first, let me tell you what reframing is. Imagine a beautiful picture in your home, a beautiful prized piece of art that you have hanging on the wall in your home. If you take that beautiful piece of art and put a beautiful frame around it, it enhances the picture, doesn't change the picture, just changes the way you look at it. If you take that beautiful piece of art and put a lousy, ugly frame around it, again, doesn't change the art, it just changes the way you look at it. That's all reframing is. Reframing is the mental process of saying, it looks like this, but I'm going to choose to think about it and look at it like this. It's that internal dialogue we have with ourselves that says, it feels like this, it looks like this, my gut reaction is it's this, but I'm going to make a choice to call it this. It's not that I'm lying to myself, but I'm choosing my attitude when I look at a situation. It's all this internal dialogue. And when we're facing challenges in life, it's a really important thing to do is say, I think it's like this, but I'm going to think about it like this. Let me give you a real life example. This happened to me a number of years ago. I was in the San Francisco Bay Area. If you've ever been in San Francisco, it's called the Bay Area because there's big giant body of water right in the middle. On the west side of the bay is San Francisco plus some other cities. On the east side of the bay is Oakland and a whole bunch of other cities. Well, I had one day, I was there for about a week. Thursday afternoon, I had to go from Oakland to the San Francisco side. I had to drive around. It's about 40 miles to go from Oakland around the bay on freeways, by the way, to San Francisco. If you've never driven in San Francisco traffic before, let me tell you this. It's horrible. You think traffic is bad where you live? Multiply it times 10. It took me 3 hours to go 40 miles. I'm not joking with you. And people do this every day. So here I am in this rental car getting frustrated at the traffic thinking, why would anybody live here? Besides the tax rate is too high, why would anybody do this? This is horrible. Then I made a choice to reframe it. What I chose to do, I chose to tell myself, well, Bryan, at least you get to spend time in this brand new rental car because when you go home, you drive a 7-year-old Honda. It's literally what I told myself. It didn't change the traffic. It just changed my focus at that time. Then I started playing with all the buttons on the dash and resetting stuff just to be just to be a little corny. I just changed the way I thought about it. I didn't change the situation. I chose the way I changed the way I chose to think about the situation. That's all reframing is. So here's how you might do it. We practice this in our own life, then we teach kids to do this as well. Is start telling yourself that you get to do something rather than you have to do it. It's a bit of a mental cheat, but if I tell myself I get to go talk with someone, even though I might be dreading it, that's different than, oh, I got to make this phone call. Ugh, right? If I say I get to, it's a privilege. If I say I have to, it's a responsibility or a weight. So start telling yourself that you get to do something. It's again a bit of a mental cheat, but it actually works quite well. Also, you can repeat things like nothing lasts forever. Here's an example of reframing in action. Set your alarm for 5:30 tomorrow morning and tell yourself this. I won't be with you at 5:30 in the morning. I'll still be asleep, but that's just a way of reframing. Say, oh, I got to go work out, or I get to go work out. It's just a way to reframe the whole conversation. Now let's make it personal, and then we'll make some connections to kids. On this next slide might be like the second most important slide I share with you tonight. So feel free to grab it or take a picture of it because it's that good. First, take a preview. I absolutely love this slide because it's forcing us as adults, whether you're a teacher, a parent, a grandparent, it doesn't matter, to think differently about the way we label people. The negative labels on the left, we use these all the time. The words on the right are the positive correlates of it. Let me give you an example. I have two boys. They're both in their 20s now. We're empty nesters. But one of my sons, when he was a teenager, was the cause of many of my gray hairs. We'll put it that way. You might have had that same exact child. Great kids doing wonderful now. You couldn't love him more. He's a great kid, but his teen years were a struggle for all of us, himself included. When he was going through his teen years, it was very easy for me to label him as rebellious. He just doesn't want to follow rules. He just doesn't care. And I would get frustrated because rebelliousness is a very small box that I put you in. I don't like dealing with people who are rebellious. But me and my wife, we had to start saying, you know what, we need to think about this differently. It was a struggle. It wasn't easy. But we really started saying, for him, it's less about rebellious behavior and more about a deep desire to be independent. The dude, from the time he was like 8 years old, just wanted to be on his own. He's like, people keep holding me back, let me go. Which is why, by the way, he ran away when he was 10. Luckily, we found him after an hour. He was on his way to the bank to get all his money, all of his $300 out of the bank. But he just wanted to go. And we've seen that in his life, a deep desire to be independent. See, when I label you as independent rather than rebellious, world opens up. I love dealing with people who desire independence. I can deal with that all day long. I struggle with someone who's rebellious. Likewise, I don't love profanity. People who drop the F-bombs all the time, I struggle with that, especially if it's a kid. But I might say it's less about profanity and more about a desire to be expressive. And my job is to teach them when it's appropriate to be expressive in certain ways. So I start to think, what are some ways I can then start framing the child and the way I deal with them just a little bit differently? And this is where I start, but I can also help kids start to reframe the situations differently. Instead of saying this test is overwhelming and I can't do it, this test is going to be a challenge and we can tackle the challenge together. Right. Rather than it's something that's going to end my life versus it's a temporary setback and we can walk through it together. Helping them reframe is a wonderful, wonderful strategy and a really important one as well, right? So we just change our language. Sometimes that reframing is the changing of language to say, no, it's okay, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, you're okay, to where I ask questions, are you okay? Instead of a lot of stops, I tell them what to do instead of more start statements than stop statements, right? Um, I change my language, and these are just some examples of how I change my language because that's helped me reframe the challenge and it helps the child to reframe the challenge as well. All right, one last note, and I realize we're already over time, but and I appreciate you hanging with me, even though we've gone a little bit too long. But I'll hang out in a moment. We'll answer questions as well. I spoke about Dr. Amen. He's the one who gave us the spec scans a moment ago. He and his wife do a lot of writing on the side as well. And they point out when it comes to reframing, start noticing what you like about other people, including your own kids, and start communicating that consistently to this person. You don't have to like everything about a child or agree everything is good, but I start pointing out what is going well in that child's life, what I appreciate about the child more than what I dislike. It's way too easy. I was guilty of this as a parent as well, of saying, this kid isn't living up to my expectation. And I taught them better than this, and they should know better than this. And how dare they, right? I just have to put myself in check as a parent. And that helps me to manage my stress as well. So that I think is probably a pretty good stopping point. Let me go down to where my contact information is, then we'll throw it into a bit of a Q&A as well. Let's see, there it is. There's my contact information. Feel free to send me an email if you want to talk more about any of this. I love this stuff. Any way I can support you as you support other people, including your own kids, don't hesitate to reach out.
One question that one of our attendees have is about parents. We can use many of these strategies at school with the students. How can we help the parents and others with whom they interact pivot and use these strategies, or at least positively interact in other ways?
And probably more than a 30-second answer, but let me preface it by this. When I'm hired to be, say, a third grade teacher, I'm hired to teach third graders, not their parents. It's not my job. I'm not paid enough to teach all those parents, but I know that my heart tells me I want to support parents as well. If a parent asks for support, absolutely provide it. If a parent's not asking for support, I'll be honest with you, I very rarely give unsolicited advice. Even when I know I've got the cure for your disease, if you're not asking for it, I'm probably not giving it to you. That's a really tough place to be because you'll look at some of the parents you work with and you'll say, if they would just do this, their kid would thrive. And you're like so convinced, and you're probably right. If they're not asking for the medicine, I probably don't give it. That's not a great answer. I know that kind of leaves us a little bit unfulfilled, but I also know this. If I give lots of suggestions to a parent about the way they should parent, that's a messy situation. Well, think about it this way. You don't want a parent who knows nothing about teaching to give you advice on how to be a better teacher. But if they ask for it, then absolutely I talk about these situations. I say, here's what I found works. Here's what's working with your kid in the classroom. So but with that said, here's what I might do. I might start sharing lots of successes that you found with their kids. So you make phone calls home and you said, today we had an amazing day. And I think it was because I did this, this, and this. Just share successes. Because when the parent hears enough of those successes that he didn't have the breakdown with you in the middle of class like he did yesterday, no, and I think he did really well because of this. You mean he really wanted to learn this? And yeah, it's like, here's why I did it. Here's how I think I got him to study. Share your successes because parents want their kids to be successful. I absolutely believe that. Even parents who are less than skilled in their approach, they want to do better. I'm a little hesitant to force ideas on somebody who's not asking for those ideas.
Question number 2 is, in your experience, what is behind the increase in student stress and anxiety over the past several years? Or is the increase a figment of our collective imagination?
That's an easy and a very complicated question. It's right here. Social media has caused so much havoc on our kids. They have access to just way too much crud way too early. So because they're constantly comparing themselves on social media to other people, and they hear these anxieties and these worries and these problems just everywhere, they're going to internalize it because then that's their world. So if you have young children, the longer you can keep them away from cell phones and devices, the better, in my opinion. I'm not suggesting that computers and laptops aren't good to help with schoolwork. Of course, we want kids to be literate and have skills when it comes to computers and technology, but the longer you can keep them away from a device, think about it, those of you who are maybe about my age, can we really say our life is better because of this device? I'm more connected, no doubt. I'm more efficient, no doubt. Is my life better?
Our third question is to ask if you can offer some strategies to help build resilience for children who are under the kind of traumatic or toxic stress that you mentioned at the beginning. In other words, how can we help children who experience one stressor after the other, where there may not be time for gratitude or even reframing? Are there any quick strategies you can recommend?
Whoever's asking me that, if you would do this, I don't want to put you off. I don't want to give you a trite answer either. Send me an email so I can give a little bit more thought to this. The answer is yes. I do have some thoughts, but I have to know more about the kid that you might be dealing with. When kids have overwhelming stressors, maybe it's trauma, maybe it's poverty, something else going on in their life, we're looking at long-term things to help. There are very few band-aids in life. When it comes to building resilience and managing stress, there are very few things that work immediately really, really well. There are things that work in the long term, like practicing gratitude, taking care of our physical health, giving them choices and control, but those don't always turn around and show us immediate results. When it comes to changing long-term behavior, especially if the behavior is coming from a place of pain in their life, a traumatic event, there are very few things that will change them overnight. But that's true of us as adults too. If you think about it, the changes you're trying to make in your life to be better, whether it's your physical health or relational health, or there's some aspect of your life you're working on right now. It's really hard to change those things. It's maybe even harder as we get older to change habits. So the behaviors that a child might have ingrained has probably been built over time. It's probably going to take some time to get them into a better behavior. But I do want to provide some additional support. So send me an email. We'll find another time to talk, or we'll have an email conversation on kind of where to go with that. I don't expect immediate results for problems that took a while to develop.
Brian, this is LaShawn.
Hi,
Everybody hear
LaShawn.
me? Got a question for you.
Go for it.
With students, I've noticed like over time, like we do like a comfort area for kids that kind of have anger problems or
Yeah.
may have need to kind of step away, or they
Yes.
may need like a corner.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of wondering, with that, what type of questions? Because I saw the questions I saw tonight were really good, and the way that we direct kids is real good too. But I was wondering, what type of questions do you have? Like, maybe some questions that we can kind of put in that corner to for those kids to kind of think about.
Yeah, I do. So I'll give you a couple of those questions here in just a moment, but I also realize this. If a kid is going to the timeout corner or the special room or whatever you call it, we have nicer names than a timeout room usually. If they're in the midst of something that's overwhelming them, they
Yeah,
might not be very good at answering those questions. Just
gotcha.
like in your own life, when you're overwhelmed by something and somebody asks you to think critically and dig and be vulnerable, you're like, "Oh, I can't do any of that. Just get away from me right now." So
Yeah,
it's often we put kids in these places and we want them to reflect and think and process, and that's good. We need them to do that. But if they're in the middle of it being anxious, the best thing to do is give them something to calm themselves. That's why we have the devices and the toys and the squishy things in order them to get some of the stressors out. Then once they get a little bit of the stressor out and they've mediated some of it out, then we can ask them the questions like, can you identify what it was that worried you or overwhelmed you? That's a question. Can you identify it? Yes or no? Can you put a word to it that describes the thing that stressed you out? So then I dig and I ask those kind of questions. What was it? How often does it happen? Those sorts of questions, only after I'm sure they're calm.
gotcha.
And here's the problem is sometimes we send a kid to these centers or these places, and I've seen lots of them. They're not bad. I think they're actually good things. And we expect a kid within 5 minutes to calm down and be able to reflect and be done and be back in class in 10 minutes.
Mm,
I don't know that that's reasonable
right.
because it takes me sometimes when I'm overwhelmed by something, it can take me a couple of days to get over it.
Yeah.
So I don't expect too much if they're not in that state.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, LaShawn. I appreciate that. It was a good question.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Really appreciate it. Be on the lookout for the email with the copy of the video when we get it up onto YouTube. And Bryan, thank you so much